He was 2 wins away from a Grand Slam title at the age of 21, was the world number 6, and was among the leaders of the next generation. Many tennis legends, including John McEnroe and Chris Evert, called him a future world number 1 and Grand Slam winner, and his growth was unbelievable. Until he began to struggle and all expectations and hopes came crashing down. Forgettable early round losses and poor form, an error-prone technique, and a lack of confidence.
For those wondering what really went wrong with Félix Auger-Aliassime's tennis, I'll tell you.
You have to win the first match, and I haven't been able to do that the last 2 weeks.
Okay, so first we're going to address the problem by looking at some of the narratives that tennis fans have about FAA, and afterward I'll give my hot takes on what I consider to be the truth.
Before Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, there was Félix, an incredibly talented prodigy born in the 2000s who shared the same birthday with Roger Federer. FAA picked up the racket at the age of 4 thanks to his father, who was also a tennis instructor, and Félix would go on to enjoy a successful junior career in singles, winning the Junior US Open in 2016 and finishing as runner-up at Roland Garros that same year.
Along with Denis Shapovalov, he was the next big thing for Canadian men's tennis after Milos Raonic.
After much success at the juniors level, Félix turned pro in 2017, and after winning a couple of challenger titles, he became the youngest player to break the top 200 since Rafa Nadal in December 2002. Félix made his ATP main draw debut the following year in 2018, but 2019 was the year FAA truly burst onto the scene. At age 18, FAA became the youngest ever ATP 500 finalist at the Rio Open, which he lost to Laszlo Djere in straight sets. He followed that up with a first top 10 win over Stefanos Tsitsipas at the Miami Open. Félix then reached the final in Lyon and at the Mercedes Cup, but lost both finals. He also reached the semis at Queens via big wins over Grigor Dimitrov and Nick Kyrgios, and would finish the year just shy of the top 20. But after an incredible 2019, Félix's performance dipped a little bit over the course of 2020, but he was back to his usual level in 2021. At this point, FAA had now employed the services of Tony Nadal to take his game to the next level ahead of the clay court season. More big wins over the likes of Roger Federer and Alexander Zverev followed, and FAA reached the quarterfinal at Wimbledon. Félix then reached the semifinals of the US Open and would later break into the top 10 before the end of the year.
Nothing could go wrong at this point, but if you noticed, something was missing. The Canadian was yet to win an ATP title, and a few question marks about his title-winning credentials started to pop up. But not for long, because he went on an absolute rampage in 2022.
After a terrible record of 0-8 in previous finals, Félix finally got his first title win in Rotterdam. He then took Nadal to 5 sets at the 2022 French Open. Hardly anyone does that. Only Novak Djokovic and John Isner have. Félix then made deep runs at a couple of tournaments before winning his second ATP title at the Firenze Open, before subsequent title wins in Antwerp and Basel. His Basel win was particularly impressive because Félix defeated the newly crowned Grand Slam champion Carlos Alcaraz and also Holger Rune en route to the title, and finished the year as world number 6. The Félix hype train was at full speed, and everyone thought that 2023 was finally going to be the year.
But it was the exact opposite.
Félix got dumped in the first round of all Grand Slam events besides the Australian Open, where he managed to reach the 4th round.
The frustrating thing is that Félix was losing to opponents he for sure should have beaten.
As the year progressed, Félix got worse, and by the time the grass season arrived, his misery was compounded by a knee injury, and it didn't get any better until the Swiss indoors in Basel, where he defended his title, but it wasn't enough to prevent him from falling out of the top 25. Félix finished the season with a 22-20 win-loss record, having finished the previous year with a 60-27 record.
For anyone who watched Félix Auger-Aliassime's game in 2023, I'm sure you'll agree with me that he was an incredibly frustrating player to watch.
His compatriot Denis Shapovalov was going through the biggest slump of his career, and FAA decided to follow suit, which made it a really tough time for Canadian tennis. Things got so bad that even when tennis legend Boris Becker was asked why Félix Auger-Aliassime's form had collapsed so much, he was unable to give an answer. Becker said, quote, "Good question. Something went wrong on the way to heaven. Only he knows," end quote.
Unlike Holger Rune and Stefanos Tsitsipas, who we make videos about following their rough patches, it's a little bit harder to understand exactly what the problem is here, but I'll do my best to make an argument based on the general narratives fans have about him. So let's get into it. By the way, I have some exciting news for all of you. We talk a lot about the ATP action here on the channel, but for those of you looking for more content on the women's game, I'm hosting and producing a TV show going behind the scenes with the events and players that make up the WTA Tour. The show is called Courtside and will be launching next month at the ATX Open. It'll be available on a few streaming platforms, and I'm pushing to make the content available here on YouTube as well. So stay tuned for more, and if you're down in Austin, come to the event and say hi. I can't wait to see you down there. And if you can't make it to the event, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest from Austin and everywhere else. Trust me, it's some of the best tennis content out there.
Felix can't buy a second serve. Felix's big serving and athleticism is a major reason why there's been high expectations for his career, but sadly, his serve is a game of two halves. Despite his decline over the past year, Felix remains in the top 5 in percentage of first serve points won in the last 52 weeks at 77.9%. Which tells you that Felix could be totally dominant on his first serve. But the first serve has to go in because Felix occupies a distant 66th place in percentage of second serves won, coming in at 49.2% in the last year.
Surely not where he'd like to be if you asked him.
And it gets even worse when you realize that Félix Auger-Aliassime is in the top 3 in terms of double faulting.
So just how can a player become so dominant on his first serve, but be mediocre at best on his second, even if it goes in?
By default, a kick serve to the backhand against right-handed players is usually the way to go on your second serve, since the topspin on the kick makes the serve easier to control. It also comes with a higher bounce, which could make it harder to attack despite being slower than the first serve. However, this must be executed properly. For FAA, the problem lies in the fact that his second serve is a little more predictable, since he tends to favor a slice serve, which obviously has little or no topspin. We all know the slice has a lower net clearance and also a lower margin for error, which puts Felix at a disadvantage since he can't really replicate it on a consistent basis. For FAA, he tries to avoid double faulting while also crowding the opponent with a body serve on the slice to the middle of the court. This gives opponents some leverage since they can anticipate the second serve and really pounce on it. FAA tries to make up for the predictability of his serve by going for more power, which could also lead to more double faulting like we can see here. But let's also consider what happens in slower conditions where the serve is a generally less potent shot. Opponents get even more time to react and can even attack the serve.
This simply suggests that for FAA to improve his results, he must be able to protect his second serve, even if it means having to change his technique.
Taking all these into consideration, here's the verdict. Slightly agree. He just seems not to be able to get more from his second serve. However, that very well could change. Felix is serious about his game, and I think he has a good attitude, so this shouldn't be a problem eventually.
But it isn't just about his second serve. We could also talk about his ground strokes.
Felix has no shot tolerance.
Honestly, the Canadian often produces a truckload of unforced errors in his game. Sometimes, watching FAA's game looks like this. Unforced error, ace, double fault, unforced error, winner, double fault.
Not a good enough outlook for someone who's considered to be one of the most talented players on tour. For instance, in his straight sets loss to Daniil Medvedev, we saw Felix make 43 unforced errors, but we've seen even worse from him. The truth is, when FAA plays badly, he simply misses too many balls to give himself a chance in the match. Honestly, his talent level is good enough for a top 10 status, but his error-prone nature is the reason why he could beat a top player, but then lose to a relatively unknown player. The reason why he sometimes makes these errors has a bit to do with the technique. His forehand is obviously his stronger stroke, and he has the ability to hit big off that wing. However, because of that, he sometimes overdoes it a bit. On the backhand side, he usually struggles to redirect the balls at sharp angles without making errors. The verdict? Agree. Even FAA himself has admitted that he needs to practice his ground strokes way more than other players.
I'm also a player that needs to practice a lot. Maybe, I don't know if more than other players, but I just know I need to spend time on the court, I need to play matches. And then I kind of course, we talk with my coach, we speak all the time about my game, and we try things in the practice, we try to improve my shots, but at the end I just need to spend time on the court and then things kind of come back naturally.
Because the longer a rally goes, the more likely you are to expect an unforced error from FAA.
We're not going to go super deep into the biomechanics of both strokes, but the most important thing for a player is to feel good with their game, because we've seen even players with flawed techniques become champions. I also think that Felix is in a much better place than he was last year. He just needs to work on the precision a little bit more.
He has told us that he's been working really hard with his team, so this shouldn't be much of a problem going forward.
But there is a bigger issue to consider.
Felix is one-dimensional. He's such a passive pusher and needs to expand his game if he wants to win a major. The truth is that the first serve and his forehand are massive upsides to his game, but he falls short in other areas. He has the speed and power quite all right, but the point construction is where the major problem is. We know that FAA is hesitant when coming forward to the net, and he also doesn't have the variety to turn a rally on its head. One of his biggest weaknesses is being one-dimensional, and his inability to adapt in the middle of a rally when things aren't going his way is really a problem.
It's sort of like a lack of a plan B. What happens when hitting super hard does nothing to someone like Novak Djokovic or Daniil Medvedev? We're both guys that can do that all day.
What then happens? Because he surely won't beat those guys from the baseline. Well, except if you're Sinner. Maybe Alcaraz too. Verdict: agree. Now, don't get me wrong, many top players struggle with adapting to a new game plan, but for Felix, it's just a little too glaring. He seems to have consistent issues with shot selection, tactics, and keeping his composure at times. He really has to sharpen his decision-making in order to realize his excellent ball-striking potential. To achieve that, his point construction surely needs a facelift, and he needs to be able to take initiative more frequently by mixing things up. Drop shots, volleys, slices, rather than just playing reactive tennis.
These three problems we've just highlighted are the reasons for this next narrative.
Felix is only good on indoor courts.
To be honest, it's a little hard to argue against this narrative. I mean, all of his titles have come at indoor courts, so this is a very valid argument.
Sometimes it just seems like Felix disappears the whole season and reappears once it's indoor season to defend his precious title in Basel.
Why is that?
The deficiencies in his game are a little less obvious on indoor hard courts, and he can serve his way out of trouble easier. Verdict: agree.
I wouldn't go as far as calling him an indoors-only guy, because for what it's worth, he once pushed Rafa to 5 sets on clay and has put up a fight on other surfaces.
Felix has the talent to play great under any condition, and he needs to show what he can do because he's gotten surpassed. Like, everyone has moved on to Alcaraz, Sinner, and Holger Rune. These guys are already winning Masters 1000s, and Alcaraz and Sinner already have Grand Slams, while 23-year-old Felix is still stuck at 250s and 500s. But after playing nearly 5 hours against Dominic Thiem at the 2024 AO, FAA told us that he now feels good with his game.
I feel like, the work that we've done is paying off.
It will be interesting to see how the season unfolds for him, but first, we must deal with this next challenge.
FAA's biggest weakness is his loyalty. He needs to drop Fontang ASAP. Fontang is a mediocre coach, and FAA would advance his game so much more with a better trainer. Félix Auger-Aliassime's coaches are former French players Guillaume Marx and Frédéric Fontang. In April 2021, he added Tony Nadal, Rafa's uncle, to the team. But that didn't really change the narrative last year, as many fans were also not impressed with Uncle Tony's work on FAA to that point. "I'll be surprised if the relationship survives this," said one TV commentator after Tony revealed he had picked a side and was rooting for Rafa when Felix played him at their 2022 Roland Garros clash. Breakpoint cameras even captured Tony, who chose to sit in neither player's box, leaving his seat at Court Philippe Chatrier during the height of the tension, with Nadal and Auger-Aliassime locked in a 5th set. Auger-Aliassime eventually lost without his coach's support. FAA fans were really angry after the match and took to social media to urge him to get a new coach. But the Canadian said that it didn't bother him in any way, and that they had an agreement that Tony would recuse himself from any matches against Rafa.
For me, Rafa's career and what he did with Tony is much bigger than the match tomorrow. I think we can all say that regardless of what happens tomorrow, I think we have to see that it's much bigger than just this. I mean, what he did with his uncle, this match will not take anything away from both sides really, and I just think we need to see it as a bigger picture. It's one match, let's play, but his career and everything is much bigger than this.
Does FAA need a new coach?
Verdict: agree.
I really don't have all the details about Felix's coaching dynamics and its problems. If you do, please feel free to share. To be honest, something's gotta give, seeing how Auger-Aliassime's form and results have varied wildly over the years.
Maybe he also needs a sports psychologist to work on the mental aspect as well. But for the coaching part, I'm not too convinced with Felix's potential success under his current caliber of coaches.
It just hasn't worked out judging from the eye test, and he could use someone new to help him clean up his game. But for the benefit of the doubt, let's see how this season unfolds and see if they can flip the switch. But first, I need to quickly debunk 2 pretty funny narratives.
Felix doesn't have the right mentality to succeed.
It is understandable to see why some fans believe that Felix doesn't have the right mentality to succeed.
The hot and cold nature of Felix's results have led to this, and to be brutally honest, Felix has lost a lot of confidence after losing to players ranked outside the top 100.
Still, I've never doubted his competitive drive and desire to get the best out of himself. No doubt, injuries have also affected his performances.
Verdict: disagree. Félix Auger-Aliassime's game is revving up, and I think we can expect a little more from him this season. He's still 23 years old and has plenty of time to fix the technical inefficiencies in his game. It's pretty easy to see that the 5-time ATP title winner is a confidence player, so the more tournaments and matches he plays and wins, ultimately the better for him.
Now to the final narrative.
Felix has no Grand Slam in him. He won't win any majors.
I found this narrative a little funny because history tells us that you can get away with the Grand Slam under the right circumstances. Really, you just need the stars to align for 2 weeks. But on a more serious note, you don't have to be the best player in the world to win a major. Talent-wise, I don't doubt the 6'4" Canadian's ability for sure. He's beaten Carlos Alcaraz and other top 10 players a couple of times, so why count him out?
Verdict: disagree. When Novak begins to lose his grip on his dominance, Grand Slams open up a little bit more and Felix may have his chances. I don't see Alcaraz, Medvedev, and Sinner making a clean sweep every year.
Felix will have his chances. After all, he's reached the semis at the US Open before. So where do we go from here?
One thing that the big three have in common is their ability to win matches despite playing badly.
For Felix to become a contender at majors, he needs to raise the level of his worst tennis to the point where it can get him through matches.
Auger-Aliassime is currently ranked number 30 in the Pepperstone ATP rankings, which is his lowest mark since May 2019 when he was just 18 years old. FAA is at a point in his career where he needs to affirm his authority as a top player.
To be honest, I think it's still a little too early to judge Felix. I feel like he's the victim of his early success, and the fact is that those younger than him have achieved way more. But as we all know, career trajectories are different, and Felix could come back to compete at the game's highest level. But what are your thoughts? Meanwhile, we made a recap of the Australian Open, covering every single detail on and off the court, so if you enjoyed this video, why not check it out? I bet you'll love it.